"Get your hands off my desk and get out of my building before I have you removed." He said it like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. Like I hadn't spent the last 4 years making sure his dry cleaning was picked up on time, and his mother got flowers on her birthday, and his business dinners ran so smoothly that his clients thought he was the most organized man alive. He said it, and I just stood there in the doorway of his office on the 42nd floor, holding a box of the things I'd left there over the years. A coffee mug, a cardigan, a framed photo of us at his sister's wedding. And I thought, he genuinely believes this is over. He had no idea it had barely started. "My name is Piper, and I need to tell you something about the kind of woman I was before all of this happened. I was the kind of woman who apologized for things that weren't her fault. Who laughed a little too quickly when someone made her uncomfortable, because making the other person feel okay seemed more important than being honest about how she felt. I was good at my job. I worked in corporate event management, which meant I was basically a professional at making other people look impressive. And I was terrible at recognizing when someone was using that skill against me. My husband's name is Donovan. When I met him, he was charming in that specific way that only looks like confidence from a distance. Up close, later, I'd understand it was something else entirely. But at 27, at a rooftop fundraiser where he spent 40 minutes asking me questions and actually listening to the answers, I thought I had finally found the rare thing, a man who paid attention. We got married after 2 years. His family had money, old money, the kind that comes with a house in Connecticut, and opinions about which prep school produced better network connections. And I came from a family that had exactly enough. My parents were public school teachers in Ohio. I had a sister 2 years younger who'd joined the army at 19 and spent the last several years doing things she wasn't allowed to tell us much about. Her name is Sloane. Wait, no, that name's taken. Her name is Zoe. Zoe and I had always been different in ways that complemented each other. I processed things by talking. She processed things by going very quiet, and then doing something decisive. I worried about what people thought. She had genuinely never seemed to care. Growing up, she was the one who stepped between me and anything that felt threatening. Not aggressively, she was never loud about it, but with a kind of absolute calm that made the threatening thing suddenly feel less certain of itself. When I married Donovan, Zoe came to the wedding and shook his hand and smiled, and afterward, on the phone she said, "He's very interested in how you make him look." I told her she was being unfair, that she didn't know him, that she'd understand once she spent more time with him. She didn't argue. She just said, "Okay, I'm always here if you need me." I should have listened the first time. The first 2 years of our marriage were fine, genuinely fine. I want to be clear about that. He was attentive. He was generous. We bought a condo in Lincoln Park, and I learned to cook things that paired well with the wine his clients brought when they came for dinner. I built his professional social life from the ground up. I knew the names of every partner at his firm, their wives' birthdays, their kids' sports schedules. I made him look like a man who was everywhere and thought of everything. What changed was gradual enough that I didn't see it clearly until I was already deep inside it. It started with comments, small ones. About my friends, "That one complains a lot, don't you think?" About my family, "Your sister is a little intense, she makes people uncomfortable." About my choices, "You ordered that? I thought you were trying to be more mindful." Each comment was small enough to dismiss, and he delivered them with such apparent concern. Such, of course I'm only saying this because I care about you, that I found myself nodding along, adjusting, explaining to my friends why I'd been less available, spending less time on the phone with Zoe. By year 3, I had become significantly smaller. Not physically, I had become quieter, more careful, more occupied with managing his mood than with having one of my own. I stopped pitching ideas at work because he'd spent so much time explaining why my instincts were off. I stopped wearing certain things because he'd made so many observations about how they read to other people. I told myself this was just what long-term partnership looked like. Compromise, adjustment, learning each other. The night I realized I was wrong, I was in our kitchen at 10:30 on a Tuesday, reheating dinner because he'd gotten home late without texting, and he walked in and looked at what I was heating and said very calmly, "I told you I had a client dinner." "Why would you make food I don't need?" I said. "You didn't tell me." I waited. He said, "Don't gaslight me, Piper," and something shifted. Because I knew what gaslighting was, and I knew which of us was doing it. and the word came out of his mouth with such fluency, such practiced ease, that I understood he had been using it as a tool for a long time. I didn't say anything that night. I went to bed and I lay there in the dark and I thought about the last 3 years in a new sequence, and by 2 in the morning I was crying silently and trying to figure out how to count the ways I had disappeared. I called Zoe the next morning when he was at work. I didn't even say hello properly. I just said, "I think you were right about him." There was a pause. Not a told you so pause, Zoe doesn't do that. A thinking pause. Then she said, "Tell me," so I told her. I told her everything, from the beginning, in the order it had happened, and she listened without interrupting, which is something she's always been good at. When I finished, she said, "Are you safe right now?" "I think so." "It's not. He doesn't get physical. Controlled doesn't have to be physical to be dangerous," she said. "But I hear you. What do you want to do?" "I don't know yet. I need to think." "Okay," she said. "But Piper, don't think too long, and don't tell him you're thinking." I asked her why. She said, "Because people who do what he's been doing don't handle the loss of control well. Once he knows you're aware of it, the dynamic changes. Give me some time to come home." Zoe had leave coming. I didn't know the details, she never shared them, but she said she could be in Chicago within 2 weeks. I told her not to rush. She said she wasn't rushing, she was planning, and those were different things. Here's what I didn't know yet. Donovan was already planning something too. I found out from his paralegal, a woman named Cecile who had worked at his firm for 11 years, and who, I later learned, had been documenting things quietly for most of them. She called me on a Thursday afternoon while I was at my office and said, "I need to talk to you in person. Not at the firm. Not anywhere he might see." We met at a coffee shop in Wicker Park. She was nervous, kept checking her phone, and she told me that Donovan had been in conversations with a financial advisor about liquidating our joint assets, not splitting them. Liquidating them into accounts that were structured under his name alone, through a shell company his college roommate had set up 18 months ago. I remember the exact moment she said it, because the coffee in front of me suddenly seemed very far away. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. "The conversation started about 8 months ago," she said. "But the company was set up before that. I think he's been planning this for a while. Why are you telling me?" She looked at her coffee cup. "Because I watched him do something similar to his first wife," she said. "And I didn't say anything then. I've been living with that." I drove home that afternoon and sat in our parking garage for 40 minutes before going upstairs. I needed to be completely composed before I walked through that door. I needed him to have no idea. I called Zoe that night from the bathroom with the shower running. I said, "He's trying to drain our accounts." She didn't say anything for a second, then, "Okay, I'll be there in 4 days, not 2 weeks. Don't move any money, don't confront him, don't change anything. Act exactly the same, Zoe. I know, but Piper, I need you to hold it together for 4 more days." "Can you do that?" I did. I made his coffee in the morning and asked about his meetings, and smiled across the dinner table, and felt myself doing the thing I had been trained to do for 3 years, performing the version of Piper that kept the situation stable. And this time I understood exactly what I was doing and why, and it made it both easier and harder than anything I'd ever done. Zoe arrived on a Friday. She didn't come to the condo, we'd agreed on that. She checked into a hotel in River North and we met in person for the first time in almost a year, in a corner booth of a restaurant he had never taken me to. I hadn't seen her in uniform in a while. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, a gray jacket, but she carried herself in a way that made the people around her instinctively give her a little more space. She looked at me for a long moment when I sat down, and I watched her take in the ways I was different, and I watched her decide not to say anything about it. "Tell me about his schedule," she said, "specifically next week." I told her. Donovan had a client dinner the following Wednesday, a big one, a potential partnership with a firm out of Dallas that he had been cultivating for months. It was the kind of thing where he'd be at his most performative, charming, expansive, full of the version of himself that had impressed me on that rooftop 7 years ago. "The dinner is at Monteverde," I said. "He made the reservation himself. 8 o'clock. Is he expecting you to be there?" "No. He stopped including me in business dinners about a year ago," said I. Directed conversations. Zoe's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. "Good," she said. "I need you to understand that what I'm going to do is not illegal, it's just direct." "What are you going to do?" she told me. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said, "You're gonna pretend to be a potential investor." "Not pretend," she said. "I do have investment capital. I've been careful with my money. I can walk into that dinner and be exactly what he thinks I am, up until the point where I'm not. He'll recognize you." "He's met me twice," she said. "At your wedding, which was 5 years ago, and at your parents' house at Christmas 3 years ago, when he spent most of the evening on his phone. I have different hair, I'll have different glasses, and people only recognize faces they've been paying attention to." She was right. Donovan had never paid enough attention to Zoe to actually see her. The plan required 3 things: a lawyer, a paper trail, and timing. The lawyer was already in place. Zoe had connected me with a woman named Bridget, a colleague of a colleague, someone who specialized in high-conflict divorce cases and financial abuse. Bridget had spent the week I was holding myself together, working with Cecile's documentation and a forensic accountant to map out exactly what Donovan had moved, when, and where. By the time Zoe arrived in Chicago, we already had enough for an emergency motion to freeze the shell company's assets pending divorce proceedings. The paper trail was the conversation we needed him to have, on record, in front of witnesses. The timing was Wednesday at 8. I want to tell you what it was like to sit in my apartment that Wednesday evening, alone, while my husband got dressed for a dinner he thought was his biggest professional opportunity of the year. He was in a good mood. That was the part that stuck with me, how good his mood was. He fixed his cuffs in the mirror in our bedroom and talked about the Dallas firm, and how this could change the trajectory of his practice. And I stood in the doorway and nodded and said, "I hope it goes well," and meant something entirely different by it. He left at 7:15. I watched his car pull out of the garage from the window. Then I sat down on the couch and called Zoe. "He just left," I said. "I know," she said. "I can see the garage from here. I'm going in at 7:50, Zoe, I know. Be careful," she said. "Piper? I've done things considerably more dangerous than having dinner with a man who underestimates women. I'll be fine. You should probably eat something." I laughed, which I hadn't expected, and that laugh felt like the first real thing I'd done in weeks. Here is what happened at Monteverde, assembled from what Zoe told me afterward, what Cecile observed from 2 tables away, and what the recording captured. Zoe arrived at 7:50 in a tailored blazer, her hair pulled back differently than she ever wore it around family, a pair of dark-framed glasses she'd borrowed from a friend. She introduced herself to the maitre d'âge as a guest of the party, which was technically true. She'd called ahead and added herself as an additional investor joining the group. Donovan didn't recognize her. She told me later that he looked right at her when she sat down and there was nothing. No flicker of familiarity, no hesitation. He extended his hand and introduced himself and gave her the smile, the one I knew so well, the one that made people feel like they were already inside a circle of exclusivity. She played her part for 45 minutes. She asked good questions, she'd done her research, which shouldn't have surprised me, and she let him talk, which was never hard to arrange. He expanded, the way he did when he believed someone was in the process of being impressed by him. He talked about his track record, his vision, the kind of partnership he was looking for. Then, at the 46-minute mark, she set her water glass down and said, "I do have one concern I want to raise before we go any further." Donovan said, "Of course. That's what this conversation is for," she said. "I've done some preliminary due diligence on your recent asset restructuring, the shell company specifically. The one registered in Delaware 18 months ago." The temperature at the table changed. She continued, "And I want to be precise here, because she was precise. The movement of marital assets into that structure without spousal disclosure or consent is the kind of thing that tends to complicate potential partnerships. It creates questions about judgment and transparency that I think any serious investor would want addressed." Donovan's voice when he responded was very controlled. "I'm not sure where you're getting that information, but this isn't the appropriate forum." "You're right," she said. "It isn't. The appropriate forum is probably the Cook County Courthouse, where I understand the filing is already in progress." She picked up her water glass again. "I'll be honest with you, I'm not actually here as an investor. I'm here as Piper's sister." The silence at that table, she told me, lasted approximately 4 seconds. The Dallas firm's representative stood up first. Donovan called me from the parking lot at 9:43. I let it ring. He called 3 more times before I picked up, and when I did, his voice had moved past controlled into something rawer. "What did you do?" he said. I said, I made sure you couldn't finish what you started. You have no idea what you've. The accounts are frozen, I said. Bridget filed this afternoon. The shell company is flagged. Cecile has given her testimony. The Dallas partnership is gone, and I imagine the rest of your current clients are going to have some questions by morning. I paused. I'd suggest talking to your own attorney tonight. He said something else, something loud and not worth repeating, and I said, goodbye, Donovan, and hung up. I sat in the quiet of our apartment for a moment. Then I started packing a bag. I was staying with a friend across town until the legal process was further along. Bridget had advised it. Zoe had seconded it. I had agreed. I took the framed photo from the mantel, the one from his sister's wedding, and I set it face down on the kitchen counter. Not dramatically. Just, I didn't want to look at it anymore. I want to tell you about the months that followed, because I think people sometimes imagine that the dramatic moment is the end of the story, and it isn't. It's more like the first day you can actually breathe. The divorce took 7 months. Donovan's attorney was good, and he fought on every front available to him. And there were days when Bridget called me with complications, and I sat in my friend's spare room and wondered if I had the endurance for this. But Cecile's documentation was solid. The forensic accounting was solid. And it turned out that Donovan, who had been so careful about appearances his entire professional life, had been considerably less careful about paper trails. The shell company was dissolved. The assets were recovered. I received my fair share of what we'd built together, and I also received something harder to quantify. A piece of paper that said, officially, that what he'd been doing had a name, and that name was financial abuse, and it was real, and I hadn't imagined it. The Dallas firm sent me a card, actually. A partner there, a woman who'd been at the dinner, had looked me up and written a handwritten note. It said something like, I don't know the full situation, but I want you to know I respect what you did. I cried over that card in a way I hadn't expected. There's something about being seen by a stranger that does something particular to you, after years of being made to feel invisible. Donovan lost 3 clients in the first month after the filing went public. He's still practicing, I don't track it closely, but the trajectory he was so confident about is not the trajectory he's on now. His first wife reached out to me. Her name is Margaux, and she lives in Denver now and she's doing well, and she said, I wish I'd known someone was watching. I told her, me too. Cecile changed jobs. She's at a nonprofit now, something to do with financial literacy for women leaving difficult situations. I had lunch with her last spring, and she ordered a glass of wine in the middle of the afternoon and laughed more than I'd expected, and I thought, this is what people look like when they've put something down that they were carrying too long. I know that feeling now. I know it from the inside. Zoe came back to Chicago for a long weekend in the fall, after everything had settled. We sat on the balcony of my new apartment, smaller than the condo on a quieter street, with a coffee shop underneath that I liked, and she had a beer and I had tea, and we watched the city for a while without saying much. Eventually she said, how are you? I thought about it. I keep catching myself apologizing for things and then stopping in the middle. I said, like I'll say I'm sorry, but, and then I'll just not finish the sentence. Because there's nothing to be sorry for, she nodded. That's probably going to take a while, I said. Yeah, she said, it will, but you'll get there. We sat for a little longer. The light was going orange over the buildings. Somewhere below us a dog was barking at something it couldn't reach. Thank you, I said, for coming. For doing what you did. Zoe looked at me in that way she has. Direct, a little serious, like she's making sure you actually mean what you're saying. Then she said, you did the hard part. You held yourself together for 4 days when most people couldn't have managed 4 hours, and you called me. That's the part that takes courage, just making the call. I thought about that Tuesday night in our kitchen, the word gaslight in his mouth. The moment I understood what I'd been walking through. I almost didn't, I said. I know, she said, but you did. The sun kept going down, my tea got cold. My sister stayed until Sunday, and when she left for the airport she hugged me at the curb outside my building. One of those long hugs where neither person wants to be the one to let go. And then she straightened up and looked at me one more time. You're going to be okay, she said. It wasn't a question. I watched her cab pull into traffic and merge with the city and disappear. And for the first time in longer than I could track, I believed her.